Hi everyone, this is Byron Jacobs making the video version of our new D&B publication, Moorman's Book of Poker. If you've looked at the book or seen any of the extracts posted on our site, you'll realise that the structure of the book lends itself very well to a video format, since it essentially consists of hand replays and analysis. The structure of the book is as follows. All of the hands are taken from various tournaments that I, Byron Jacobs, have played over the last 18 months, this being a period from 2013 and 2014. The majority have buy-ins of approximately $50, with the exception of the PokerStars Supernova free roll, which, although having no entry fee, plays like a $200 buy-in event. I have tried to choose hands from tournaments with a variety of different structures, both in terms of the format as well as the rapidity of the blind increases. As well as normal tournaments, there are turbos, super turbos, hypers, 6 max and rush tournaments. In some of the tournaments I bust out quite early, but there are others in which I either win the event or at least make the final table. This provides a good variety of hands, ranging from early deep stack play and bubble play through to final table short stack play. I have, in general, avoided hands where the effective stack size is less than 15 BB, since at these stack depths the play becomes quite mathematical and the correct decisions can usually be generated by a number of different software programs. The hands are grouped together from particular events, since occasionally the commentary refers back to the play of a previous hand. Before each collection of hands there is a brief explanation of the tournament structure. Obviously, the format of the tournament is of great importance in determining the most successful ways to play the hands. In particular, the faster structures, especially those that introduce an ante early on, require more aggressive stealing and re-stealing, consequently leading to wider post-flop ranges. I have also tried to select a variety of hands that demonstrate the great range of problems that need to be solved at the poker table. They vary from quite straightforward standard heads-up spots to unusual multi-way situations. The discussion of all the hands is structured in the same way. The play of the hand is given, and then I provide my own commentary and thoughts. You will know that it is my commentary because while I am speaking, an image of me will appear here in the top left-hand corner of the screen. When I am giving my analysis, I will include any thoughts on the table dynamics and any reads I have on the other players. I also articulate my thoughts about my own play and that of the villains. When I have finished, it will be Chris's turn, and he will step in and critique the play and the analysis. You will know that Chris is speaking because my image in the top left-hand corner of the screen will be replaced by his, as you can see here. Chris will then give his own thoughts on the play of the hand and indicate what he considers to be the optimal lines. Finally, when Chris has finished, I will provide a short conclusion. Again, the image in the top left-hand corner will change, and this will be what appears to me to be the key lesson of the hand. We think that this structure works very well and is highly instructive. The vast majority of serious and semi-serious tournament poker players will be competing near this level and will probably have thinking processes similar to mine. It is enlightening to see where this kind of thinking works well, but also to identify situations where it proves wanting. I have found it fascinating that in almost every hand in this book, probably 90% or more, Chris finds a better line than the one I actually chose, and clearly explains the concepts that make the play preferable. Occasionally it is a completely different approach, but more often it is a case of fine-tuning, such as finding a more accurate bet size or raise size. Understanding these ideas is absolutely fundamental to improvement, since long-term success in poker is based on the accumulation of small edges. There is no better player than Chris Moorman for demonstrating where those edges can be found. With the blinds at 30-60, I am now playing approximately 150 BB against most of the table. Sitting MP1 with 10-10, I raise to 2.5 BB and only get called by the big blind. I have some information on the big blind. He has been quite splashy and his bet sizing has been weird. There was one hand in particular in which he made a massive overshove in a small pot and his opponent folded. The flop comes Jack 3-5, and I decide that, bearing in mind his previous form, the best plan is to give him some rope by checking. Also, if I make a standard c-bet here and he again makes a massive overshove, I will be in a tough spot, since it will really be a pure guess as to whether he has a jack or not. The turn card pairing the jack is a very good one. I decide that I will call any turn and river bets, since the second jack makes it much harder for him to actually have one. He makes a 1.5 times pot size turn bet, which is an easy call. The river completely blanks, and he makes close to a pot sized bet, which I call, and he shows up with total air. If he had overbet the pot on the river, a strange play but similar to his previous massive overshove, I would definitely have called. My standard line in this spot would be to bet the flop every time. You get value from a ton of middle pairs, some ace highs and any straight draws or 3x/5x hands. Also, pocket tens are somewhat vulnerable because any overcard on the turn will put you in a potentially difficult spot on the turn and river. However, knowing that villain has been splashy and somewhat unpredictable, I don't mind your flop check for pot control and to induce bluffs on future streets. Putting in a ton of money on this flop so early in the tournament would have very high variance. I wouldn't be entirely comfortable with this unless my opponent had proven himself to be incredibly crazy. The turn card is great for your hand. It's not an overcard and it's another jack, which makes it much less likely that your opponent holds one. It also counterfeits a very unlikely 5-3 for a flopped 2 pair. His turn sizing of 1.5 times pot is a little scary, but I agree that you can't fold at this point. It also puts a possible flush draw out there, which is a strong possibility considering villain is likely defending most of his suited combinations pre-flop this deep to a raise of 2.5 BB. Also, you don't have the 10 of clubs, which gives him a few more combinations of flush draws. If the river were the king of clubs, for example, you would be in a tough spot facing a large bet, as it would be an easy value bet for him with any boat, flush, jack, or even any king. The 2 of hearts is an incredibly good river for you. The only draws getting there are ace-4 and 6-4. Therefore, most of the flush draws missed on the river. Also, if villain is leading any kind of random air on the turn and not giving up on the river, it makes for an incredibly easy river call. You have to be right less than half the time for it to be profitable. Considering how wide he is likely defending pre-flop here, most of his range will be air on this run-out. Although I thought through this hand okay, it is clear that my thought processes are a little too generalised. Where I am having thoughts such as, that's not a scary card, or that doesn't complete any draws, Chris is far more precise in his assessment of the villain's range. The blinds and antes are still 250, 500, 60, and I'm at the table where the players are playing passively and straightforwardly. I have a stack of slightly less than 15k and open to 1000 with the hand King-Jack offsuit in the hijack. I have been stealing successfully at this table, but on this occasion I actually get called by the button and both blinds. All of us are playing stacks which are between 15k and 21k. The flop brings 6-5 king, giving me top pair on a moderately wet board since it features 2 spades and also has the 6-5 combo, although this is perhaps a little low to connect with speculative drawing hands. Something like King 7-8 would be more worrying. There is 4360 in the pot, and the effective stack is my stack of just under 14k. The other 3 players all have me covered, but not by much. The blinds check, and having hit top pair decent kicker, I c-bet for 2000. I wasn't sure what to do if anyone raised or shoved over this bet. In principle, a raise or shove here could be from a fairly wide range, as there are a number of possible drawing hands. The only obvious made hands that are ahead of King-Jack are Ace-King, King-Queen, 6-6, 5-5 and 6-5. At these stack depths I would expect that Ace-King is almost certainly shoving pre-flop, especially when it becomes multi-way, and 6-5 is a bit weak to be calling, although 6-5 suited from one of the blinds is not out of the question. King, Queen, 6-6 and 5-5 are all quite plausible. In this game, with these players, I would fold to a raise, since they play very straightforwardly, and by c-betting the flop into 3 callers, I show some strength. On a tougher table I'd be far less sure what to do. What actually happens is that the button folds, the small blind calls, and the big blind folds. I read the small blind as having mainly draws in his range and King X holdings. Occasionally he might also have a 6x or 5x hand, and very occasionally he might have a set. I should mention that I think it's also possible that he has aces. Although he should raise this pre-flop, it's not at all unusual, certainly at this level, to see players play aces in this way, hoping to stack someone who has made a decent hand on the flop. It's almost certainly not the best way to handle aces, since the reverse implied odds post-flop, especially with more than one caller, are substantial. The aces usually end up winning a moderate pot, but get stacked often enough that the EV of this passive line pre-flop gets trashed. Returning to the hand, the turn brings 6 King 5 2, which is a complete blank as far as draws are concerned. The pot is now 8360 and the effective stack is 11,777. The small blind checks. I am slightly torn between wanting to protect my hand with a bet but not being happy with a bet fold line if he raises. I therefore decide to check, since if he happens to be beating me the result will be the same, as he'll probably bet around half pot on the river and I'll call. However, if the draws miss and he bets again, I can easily call, since he could be bluffing a busted draw. The river brings 6 King 5 2 9, which only helps 7 8. The small blind now makes a modest 2,500 bet, which is obviously an easy call, and he shows up with 7 9 of hearts and my kings are good. I think his pre-flop call is okay, but his call on the flop looks ridiculous, since, unless I'm c-betting into 3 opponents with air, he'll have to hit an 8 to win the pot, and we're playing so short that his implied odds are minuscule. I still wouldn't like the call even if he had a backdoor flush draw, but he doesn't even have that possibility. I also don't like his river bet, since, having made a pair, he now has a decent bluff catcher. After he bets the river, I am never calling with a weaker hand. Chris: I really like your line here on every street. Your hand isn't good enough to go for 3 streets of value, and if you do end up bet folding on the turn, villain could be semi-bluffing with a hand like 9-7 of spades for a gut shot and flush draw. Bet folding against a combo draw would be a huge disaster, because you would be a substantial favourite with only one card to come, getting incredible odds. Villain's play is far from good. First of all, I dislike his overcall from the small blind. He will be playing out of position against at least 2 opponents for the remainder of the hand, and the big blind could still squeeze, which would prevent him from seeing the flop. Also, suited connectors are very tricky to play out of position at this stack depth. The small blind has too many chips to check-shove the flop with draws, but will have difficulty winning the pot when he misses, when either you or the button has the opportunity to pot control or barrel off on brick turns. If the small blind feels you're opening wide enough and he has a good image, it is actually a very good spot to raise pre-flop to around 3,500. The button's flat call here is usually a pretty weak range that just wants to see a flop in position. He will often fold to this re-raise because the stack to pot ratio will be less than 2 after the flop. If you or the button flat the squeeze, the small blind will have a very profitable continuation bet on a lot of boards and a very disguised hand. Also, he will be able to bet call with any potential draw that he flops due to the substantial size of the pot. If the small blind had 9-7 suited in the big blind, I would advocate just calling pre-flop because he is getting much better odds and he closes the action. Once the small blind sees the flop, he cannot profitably continue here. With a flush draw on board, he only has 3 outs to the nuts, and you likely have a decent hand, betting on this semi-wet board 4 ways. After the small blind calls, he should check this river and decide whether to bluff catch if you bet. If he bets here, he is never getting called with worse and never folding out better. Therefore, it would be an incredibly bad bet. Conclusion. The play of the hand is fairly straightforward, but I like the way Chris analyses what the small blind should be thinking about pre-flop in the context of the way the hand can play out. Thinking through this reveals that he will be hard-pressed to get value from any draw he picks up due to the combination of him having to play out of position and the shallow stack size.